So when you're looking to obtain a license for your business, there's a few options that you have. The first is to acquire your own license. You can become an authorised representative of another licensee, or you can enter into a white label agreement. And we'll go through each of these three options today as we move through the webinar. So firstly, obtaining your own AFSL. You'll need to determine what authorisations you need. And Sophie went through this in a bit more detail in last week's webinar. So you'll need to decide what financial products you'll be working with under your AFSL, whether you'll be dealing or providing advice in those products. Will you be providing services to retail or wholesale clients, or both? Will you be making a market? Will you be operating a fund, or will you be providing custody or depository services? So the most important aspect of obtaining your license is choosing your responsible managers. So these requirements are outlined in Regulatory Guide 105, and you must ensure that the RM you nominate has the appropriate skills and experience in each of the authorisations that your business is seeking. So we often find that this is the biggest hurdle for our clients, as many do not satisfy either the experience or the qualification requirement. So to get an AFSL, the most common options for your responsible manager to be assessed is under option 3 or option 4. And that requires your responsible manager to have at least 3 out of the last 5 years experience on an AFSL that provides the same services. Under an option 3, your responsible manager must have a relevant tertiary qualification, so either a Bachelor of Economics, Business or Accounting, as well as a short industry course that's relevant. So there's some further examples outlined in RG 105. Under option 4, your responsible manager must have a qualification that's at a minimum of a diploma level, and this is listed on the ASIC training register, or is in a relevant industry, so a diploma of financial services or financial markets. The other option which responsible managers are often assessed under is the option 5, and that's where ASIC will look at the experience over the last 10 years. This is a good option if you're nominating someone that has overseas experience or doesn't quite fit the last 3 out of the last 5 years. So under option 5, you need to be able to just demonstrate that your RM has at least 5 years experience over the last 10 years. However, we generally see that ASIC pushes for 6 years, even though this is not stated in RG 105, and there's no specific qualification requirement for the option 5 criteria. If your license is going to be dealing with retail clients, your responsible managers must have RG 146 in all of the financial products that you'll provide advice on. And they must have held this for at least 3 years while they built up that 3 of the last 5 years experience under the AFSL. So the next step is to draft and submit your documents to ASIC. So these documents are known as your proof documents and consist of both the core proofs and the additional proof documents. So your core proofs include your A5 business description, and this is just a summary of your business details, your fit and proper person requirements for directors, secretaries and controllers, and we'll go through this in a bit more detail in a few more minutes. Your organisational expertise table for each responsible manager, also known as the B1 proof, and that's developed for each RM. Then you have your financial resources proof and statements. So you'll need to submit a balance sheet and a cash flow projection, as well as a Word document that outlines how you'll meet each of your financial resources requirements under the license. Your additional proof documentation is specific to the authorisations which your business is seeking to obtain, and the documents generally cover a range of compliance obligations as well as procedures in place in relation to specific authorisations. So specific technologies that you'll use if you're going to operate a non-cash payment wallet, for example, and how they'll be monitored and who will be responsible for monitoring that technology. Once you get the license, there's of course your ongoing compliance measures, and you're required to implement procedural documentation to address the obligations imposed on the AFSL. So these will cover your requirements under the Corporations Act and regulations, the relevant ASIC regulatory guides, your specific AFSL conditions, AML/CTF legislation, and any other applicable financial services laws. We'll be covering the ongoing compliance requirements in further detail in an upcoming webinar, I believe in week 4. So applying for your own ACL is a very similar process. Under the credit license, you have 3 kind of variations. So you can either be the credit provider, a credit assistance provider, or you can obtain both authorizations. So the credit provider license allows you to engage in credit activities as a credit provider under a credit contract or consumer lease, and by carrying on a business of providing credit to which the National Credit Code applies. So your typical example is loan issuers and consumer rent-to-own businesses. A credit assistance provider deals directly with the consumer or the consumer's agent in the course of, as part of, or incidentally to a business carried on in Australia. So for example, if you suggest the consumer applies for an increase to their limit on a particular credit contract and apply for that increase, then you're providing credit assistance. So the typical example of this is your mortgage broker. And then of course you can have both authorizations on your license, which is typical of your banks and similar businesses. So once again, you have to have appropriate responsible managers, and the requirements for ACL RMs are outlined in Regulatory Guide 206. So your responsible manager must have at least 2 years of relevant problem-free experience since the ACL regime commenced, and they also must have a relevant qualification in the credit industry to at least the Certificate 4 level or another general level higher qualification such as a diploma or university degree. If the business is providing third-party home loan credit assistance, the responsible manager must have at least the Certificate 4 in finance and mortgage broking, and that's a requirement that ASIC is really strict on, and it's outlined in the regulatory guide that your RM must hold that qualification to get the ACL. The next step is to draft and submit your documentation. Under the ACL, there's not as many documents that need to be submitted to ASIC. So your first one is the summary business description, and that's a document that outlines your business activities so ASIC can understand how the business will work and the types of credit activities you propose to engage in under the license. Secondly, you must prepare the fit and proper people proof so that ASIC can understand how the business will meet and maintain its organisational competence. And this document is an outline of each responsible manager's experience. And then again, of course, there's the additional fit and proper people information that we'll touch on shortly. So as an ACL holder, you must ensure that you comply with the general ongoing requirements set by ASIC for your ACL and implement compliance procedural documentation. Examples of ongoing obligations include ensuring that your credit activities are engaged in efficiently, honestly, and fairly, and that's prescribed by the legislation. Ensuring representatives are adequately trained, having dispute resolution procedures, having your documented compliance arrangements and systems, having in place adequate resources and risk management systems, and regular reporting to ASIC. So as mentioned, there are fit and proper person requirements for AFSL and ACL holders. So new legislation requires all applicants to satisfy a fit and proper person test in relation to the applicant's officers, all of their controllers, and the controllers' officers, and in some cases, their senior management. So who is required to meet the fit and proper person test? If the applicant is a body corporate, all of its officers, as defined in Section 9, must satisfy the fit and proper person test. If it's a partnership or a trust, all of the partners or trustees, as well as the senior managers of the partnership or trust, must satisfy the test. And for every applicant, all controllers, being any person who controls the applicant, right up the chain of ownership to the applicant's ultimate controller. So you need to provide the information for each controller, going all the way back to an individual. So should you obtain your own license? There are many advantages and disadvantages, And this is a question that we get quite often. Of course, you'll need to conduct a cost analysis to decide which option is appropriate for you, taking into consideration all of your circumstances. But by obtaining your own license, you can provide the exact services and products that you want. You aren't limited by the supervision of another licensee. You can expand your business and authorize other representatives for a fee, and they can provide certain services under your license. It can be a more profitable option for you because your representatives pay you a fee for providing the services, and you can create your own compliance regime. So essentially, you are your own boss, and you have the flexibility to carry on business the way in which you want. But of course, there are disadvantages to that. So you have to develop the compliance systems. You must implement and maintain the systems, the templates, the research and the training. There's less guidance. So if you're new to the market, you need to spend more time monitoring compliance and risk landscape. You don't have the oversight of another licensee to assist you. You are required to meet the relevant industry experience, and there's potentially more legal and regulatory risks as the principal. So when do you apply for a license? You have to consider the most appropriate time for your business to apply for its own license, taking into consideration that ASIC can take some months to assess and approve an application. The shortest time frame that we're seeing at the moment is approximately 4 months for an AFSL and an ACL, and obviously the more complex the application, the longer the time frame is, and ASIC has just recently extended its time frame for application assessment. You should also only apply for a license if you intend to utilize all products and authorizations under the license within the first 6 months. So ASIC has recently been granted the power to cancel licenses if the licensee fails to commence its business within 6 months of the license being granted. You can apply for an exemption within this 6-month time frame, but ASIC has stated that they'll only grant the exemptions in quite specific circumstances, and not merely just because the business has been taking time to prepare and get ready to go to market. As we'll move on to becoming a representative of another licensee. Okay, so there's no questions. Oh, no, we've got one coming through. In relation to slide 1. So the question that has come through is, does ASIC require buy now, pay later companies to apply for an AFSL license? And at this stage, no, they don't. They're also not caught by the credit licensing regime if they fall within the specific requirements of the NCCP. Okay, let's move on to becoming a representative of another licensee. There are certain advantages in operating under an existing license. So as we've touched on earlier, many legal risks lay with the licensee. The licensee incurs the costs and provides the compliance systems, but it's also a quick path to market. So it allows you to operate whilst waiting for ASIC to assess your license application. And becoming an authorised representative is also a good option to gain relevant industry experience prior to obtaining your own license if you don't meet that requirement and you don't have a responsible manager in which you can nominate. So we've had another question come through that says, is it both the qualification and experience requirements together? Yes, it is. So you need to satisfy both elements of the responsible manager criteria. If we just go back to the AFSL slide. So under RG 105, you have to meet both the experience and the qualifications. So you need to have at least 3 of the last 5 years experience, as well as the relevant tertiary qualification. If you can't meet that 3 of the last 5 years, then obviously you have the option to go under the option 5, which is the 5 or 6 years out of the last 10 years. Obviously, it depends on the type of license that you're going to apply for. So you need to have the specific experience in that industry. If you're going to apply for a funds management license, for example, you need to be able to show ASIC that you've worked for a business that provides funds management services for at least 3 of the last 5 years. And if it's with retail clients, you've held that RG 146 qualification for at least 3 of the last 5 years. So moving back on. So who can become a representative of another licensee? So representatives can be individuals, they can be body corporates, they can be partnerships, or a group of individuals or body corporates that are trustees of the trust, but a trust itself cannot be a representative. So a representative that is not an individual can sub-authorize individuals to provide services on their behalf under the licensee, but only where the licensee has consented in writing. A body corporate that is an authorised representative will generally need to sub-authorise its directors and employees in order to provide services on its behalf. And that's included under the Corporations Act, that these individuals must be appointed. So one person can be a representative of 2 or more licensees, but only if each of the licensees has consented, or that the 2 licensees are related body corporates. So how do you notify ASIC of representative appointments? AFSL holders appointing authorised representatives must notify ASIC of their appointment within 30 business days via the ASIC Connect portal. ACL holders must notify ASIC of any credit representative appointments within 15 business days, and that's done through the credit licensee portal. So once you obtain your own license, you will gain access to each of the relevant portals. At this stage, unfortunately, there's a variety of portals for each licensee, and you need to determine which lodgement needs to be made through which portal. But ASIC is working to streamline that and is moving towards just using the regulatory portal. So the third option is to enter into a white label agreement. So that's where a product or a service is created by one company, and then you just rebrand and sell that product under your own company with your marketing. So on this slide, there are some examples of white labeling solutions. So if we look at the left-hand side, for example, this is the ASIC AFSL register, and we can see that the AFSL holder is AXICorp Financial Services, and underneath there's listed a variety of trading names. So these companies have essentially white labeled AXICorp's product and are using it for their own services. So AXICorp will have just linked the trading name to their AFSL, and the provider such as AXIForex will be providing the services through AXICorp's AFSL, without AXIForex having to obtain its own license or become an authorised representative. So on the right-hand side, you can see that this is common for big companies such as Woolworths and Qantas. So obviously they don't issue their own insurance products. So here is the disclaimers taken from their website, and you can see that Woolworths and both Qantas has let you know that the insurance is issued by another AFSL holder, and that they're just acting under a white label arrangement. So there are advantages and disadvantages of using the white labeling option. So, and the advantages are that you can offer a comprehensive product or service at a lower price. You don't carry the cost of being the financial services provider. It enables a faster time to market. There's reduced production costs, and you don't need to obtain your own licensing immediately. The disadvantages are you obviously need to build a stable relationship with your white label partner to avoid any misunderstandings, and make sure they understand how your product or service works. There can be restrictions on how and where you can resell the product, and product modifications may not be allowed. So you're quite restricted to the financial services product offering and service offering.